Hey, fellow coders, welcome back. You know, we love to geek out on the nitty-gritty, so today we're going deep on JavaScript syntax.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to be breaking it down, especially for our junior devs out there.
Absolutely. We've got a really cool YouTube tutorial as our source today,
Yeah, this one's super popular because it covers almost every single syntax element.
which is awesome, but also a little daunting, maybe,
True.
especially if you're just starting out. So we're going to help you sift through it, pull out the need-to-know stuff, and maybe a few surprises along the way.
Right. We actually stumbled across a pretty surprising fact about function hoisting.
Ooh, yeah, we'll get to that. But first things first, let's talk variables and data types. Every junior dev's got to master those. We're talking about var, let, and
The
cons.
classics, right?
Totally. But they can be a bit tricky. What's the deal with scope again?
Right. So scope is all about where your variable can be accessed. Think of it like a VIP area at a concert.
Okay, I like that.
So var is like the main stage. Everyone's got access. It's function scoped.
Gotcha.
But let and const, they're more exclusive. They're block scoped. Like you got to have the right wristband to get in.
Makes sense.
And speaking of cons, we're big fans of using that whenever you can.
Oh, for sure. Predictability, keeping things nice and clean.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to data types, most of us know the basics. Numbers, strings, booleans.
Right, right. But JavaScript throws in a few curveballs, too.
Yeah.
Null, undefined, symbol.
Yeah, and it's important to understand those nuances, especially when you run into those equality comparison issues.
Oh, yeah, double equals versus triple equal.
Exactly. Loose versus strict equality. That one's a classic head scratcher.
It definitely trips people up. So what's the quick and dirty explanation for our junior devs?
Well, loose equality can get a little fuzzy with type coercion. JavaScript tries to be helpful, and sometimes it converts types behind the scenes, which can bring some unexpected results.
Yeah, JavaScript tries to be too smart sometimes.
Right. So strict equality, it's more rigorous. You're basically telling JavaScript, hey, I want you to compare both the value and the type. No funny business.
Gotcha. So strict equality is like no shortcuts, JavaScript, be precise.
Precisely.
All right, so we've got variables, we've got data types. What's next on our JavaScript syntax adventure?
Let's power up with some operators. And we're talking about more than just your pluses and minuses here.
Oh, yeah, JavaScript gives us a whole arsenal of tools, right?
Yeah.
Modulus, exponentiation.
And shorthand assignment operators. They're like little time savers, right?
Totally. Like plus equals plus instead of
Yeah.
writing out the whole thing.
Exactly. And you know what else can save you a ton of time and frustration? Understanding operator precedence.
PIMDAS, right? Back to middle school. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division, then addition and subtraction.
Exactly. It's like the grammar of math, making sure everything gets calculated in the right order.
So PIMDAS,
Oh?
it's not just for math class anymore.
Nope. It's super important for JavaScript, too. Now, speaking of control, let's talk about controlling the flow of our code.
Oh, yeah. Control, flow, making decisions, choosing paths, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the big players here are if, and else statements. They're like the roadmaps for your code.
I like to think of it like choosing what to eat. Like, if I'm hungry, I'll order pizza. Else, I'll just have a snack.
Perfect analogy. And if you're just making a simple either decision, there's this super handy thing called the ternary operator.
Yeah, yes. The ternary operator, it's like a shortcut for ifels. Super useful when you've got a simple condition.
Right. And then we got switch statements. Those are great when you've got a bunch of different cases to handle.
Like choosing an outfit based on the weather, maybe.
Exactly. If it's sunny, wear shorts. If it's raining, grab an umbrella. If it's snowing,
Yeah.
so on.
So many choices. All right, we've made some decisions. We've controlled the flow. Now it's time for some action, right?
Looping time.
For loops, while loops, do while loops, all those good things. Oh, yeah. Loops, they're perfect for when you need to do something over and over again, like printing out a list of items.
Exactly. For loops are your go-to when you know exactly how many times you want to loop. Like, I want to print this message 10 times.
And while loops?
Those keep going as long as a certain condition is true. Like, keep playing this song until someone presses stop.
Got it. And do while.
The main difference there is that do while always runs at least once, even if the condition is false from the start. Kind of like, try this once and then decide if you want to do it again.
Interesting. So lots of options for looping, which is great because sometimes you need to repeat things. I know I do.
Right.
But loops can also be a little tricky, right?
Yeah, definitely. Especially when you're first starting out, it's easy to accidentally create an infinite loop.
Oh, yeah, that's happened to me before. Not fun. Your computer just keeps running and running.
Yeah, it's like a hamster on a wheel that never stops. So make sure your loop condition is set up correctly so you don't get stuck in an infinite loop.
Solid advice. Okay, so we've covered loops. What's next?
Now we're stemming into the realm of functions, the building blocks of well-structured code.
Ah, yes, functions, gotta love them. They're like little reusable chunks of code.
Right. Think of them as recipes. You've got a recipe for chocolate chip cookies. You can use it over and over again to make cookies whenever you want.
And each function has like inputs and outputs, right?
Yep, exactly. Inputs are the ingredients, and the output is the delicious result.
Cookies. Okay, so functions are basically like little code machines that take in some stuff and spit out a result.
That's a great way to put it. And now, for that surprising fact I mentioned earlier.
Ooh, yeah, you've been teasing this all episode. Hit me with it.
So get this. Functions in JavaScript get hoisted.
Hoisted. What does that even mean?
It means you can actually call a function before it appears in your code.
Wait, what? That sounds backwards.
It kind of is, but it's a JavaScript thing.
Okay, so like, why would you ever do that? Call a function before it's even defined.
Honestly, it's usually not the best idea. It can make your code harder to read.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like reading a book where the ending comes before the beginning.
Exactly. It's just not the natural flow. So even though you can do it, it's usually best to declare your functions before you use them.
All right, good to know. So function hoisting.
Yeah.
Cool trick, but use with caution.
Definitely. Now, speaking of writing cleaner code, have you heard of arrow functions?
Oh, yeah. Arrow functions are all the rage these days, right? They're like the shorthand, super efficient way to write functions.
They make your code look cleaner and more modern.
But there's a catch, right? Something about this keyword.
Ah, yes, the infamous this keyword can be a little bit of a troublemaker.
So what's the deal with this in arrow functions?
Okay, so in regular functions, this refers to the object that called the function.
Okay, makes sense.
But arrow functions, they work a bit differently. This is determined lexically.
Lexically. That sounds complicated.
It's actually not too bad. Think about it like those Russian nesting dolls.
Okay.
Each doll is contained within a larger doll, right? So with arrow functions, this is determined by the surrounding context, like which doll it's nested inside.
Interesting. So it's like this is looking up to its parent for its meaning rather than down to who called it.
Exactly. We'll definitely dive deeper into that later on with some more concrete examples.
Sounds good. All right, so we've covered functions, both regular and arrow varieties. What's next?
Let's get organized with some data structures, starting with arrays.
Oh, yeah. Arrays are those awesome little containers for storing lists of data.
Right. Think of them like those drawers in a toolbox. Each drawer holds different tools.
I like that. So each element in the array is like a tool in the drawer.
Exactly. And you can access each element by its index, which is like its position in the drawer.
And JavaScript gives us a ton of handy methods for working with arrays, right?
Tons. We can add elements, remove elements, sort them, slice them, and dice them. It's like having a whole set of tools for organizing your toolbox.
So what are some of those essential array methods that our junior devs should know?
Well, there's push and pop for adding and removing elements from the end of the array.
Okay, like stacking and unstacking tools in the top drawer.
Exactly. Then you've got shift and unshift, which do the same thing but at the beginning of the array.
Got it. And how about some of the more advanced array methods?
Well, there's slice and splice, which are super useful for extracting or modifying portions of an array.
Ooh, those are powerful.
They are. And then for combining and copying arrays, the spread operator is pure magic.
Spread operator is like it's like taking all the tools out of your toolbox and laying them out on a table.
Exactly. It lets you expand an array into its individual elements, which can be super handy for all sorts of things.
Got it. All right, so we've got arrays down. What other data structures should we explore?
Let's talk about objects. Objects are like those multi-compartment organizers where you can store all sorts of things.
Okay, I like that. So each compartment is like a property of the object.
Exactly. And each property has a key, which is like the label on the compartment, and a value, which is the stuff you store inside.
So it's like key.snacks, value.cookies.
Exactly. And JavaScript gives us two ways to access those values: dot notation and bracket notation.
Dot notation is like object.property.
Right. And bracket notation is like object property.
When would you use one versus the other?
Dot notation is the most common way, but bracket notation is handy when you're dealing with keys that have spaces or special characters in them.
Makes sense. And what about those special functions that live inside objects?
Ah, yes. Those are called methods. They're like the built-in actions that an object can perform.
So if our object is a car, it might have methods like start, stop, accelerate, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Methods make objects much more dynamic and interactive.
Awesome. All right, so we've got objects. What else is on our data structures tour?
Well, we should at least mention maps and sets. They're a bit more specialized.
Okay, give me the quick rundown. What are they all about?
So maps are kind of like objects, but they offer more flexibility with key types. You can use any data type as a key in a map.
Interesting.
And sets, those are all about uniqueness. You can't have duplicate values in a set.
So sets are like those collector's items that are one of a kind.
Exactly, like a set of rare stamps or vintage coins.
Got it. Okay, so maps and sets. A little more niche, but still good to know.
Definitely. Now let's shift gears and talk about strings. Strings are the words and sentences of your code, all
Yeah.
about text.
Right, right. Strings are like those neon signs that grab your attention.
Exactly. And just like with arrays and objects, JavaScript gives us a whole bunch of methods for manipulating strings.
Like what kind of things?
Well, we can combine strings, extract parts of them, search within them, replace text, all sorts of things.
It's like having a text editor built right into JavaScript.
That's a great way to put it.
So what are some of the must-know string methods?
Well, there's concat
Yeah.
for combining strings.
Okay, like putting two words together.
Exactly. Then there's slice for extracting a portion of a string.
Got it.
And for more complex string formatting, template literals are super handy.
Template literals, those are the ones with the backticks, right?
Yep. They let you embed variables and expressions right into your strings, which can make your code much cleaner and easier to read.
I love template literals. They're like the power tool for string formatting.
Absolutely. Now, for our junior devs out there who are venturing into Node.js land.
Ooh, yeah, Node.js, taking JavaScript beyond the browser.
Exactly. Node.js lets us do things like read and write files on the server, which opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
So how do we actually work with files in Node.js?
Well, there's this handy module called S, which stands for file system.
Makes sense.
And it gives us a bunch of functions for working with files, like reading them, writing to them, deleting them, and more.
It's like having a digital filing cabinet on your server.
That's a great way to think about it.
So how do we actually read a file, say?
You would use the fs.read file function, which is asynchronous, by the way.
Asynchronous. What does that mean again?
It means that it doesn't block the execution of your code while it's reading the file. Node.js can do other things in the meantime.
Okay, so it's like, go ahead and read that file. I'll do some other stuff while you're at it.
Exactly. And when the file is done reading, Node.js will let you know.
Got it. So asynchronous operations are like those little helpers that work in the background.
That's a good way to think about it. And speaking of things that can happen in the background.
Uh-oh, it sounds like we're getting into error territory.
Indeed. Errors are a fact of life in programming. Things go wrong, files can't be found, networks go down. You know how it is.
Ugh, yeah. Errors are the worst, but we got to deal with them.
Exactly. And that's where error handling comes in. It's all about making sure your program doesn't crash and burn when something unexpected happens.
It's like having a safety net for your code.
Precisely. And our main tool for error handling is the try.catch block.
Okay, how does that work?
So you put the code that might throw an error inside the try block. And if an error does happen, it gets caught by the catch block.
Got it. So it's like, try this, and if something goes wrong, catch it.
Exactly. The catch block lets you handle the error gracefully, maybe log it, display a friendly message to the user, or try to recover from the error somehow.
And what about the finally block? What's that all about?
Finally is like the cleanup crew. It always runs whether there was an error or not.
So no matter what, finally comes in and tidies things up.
Precisely. It's often used to release resources, like closing file connections, to make sure everything is neat and tidy.
Okay, makes sense. So try.catch.finally. It's like a three-step process for handling errors gracefully.
Exactly. Now, sometimes errors can be a bit sneaky, and they like to travel. We call this error propagation.
Error propagation, like the error is contagious or something?
Kind of. It means that an error can bubble up from a nested function to a higher level function.
Okay, so like if a function calls another function and the inner function throws an error, the outer function might also get affected.
Exactly. And sometimes that's what you want, but sometimes it's not. So it's important to think about where you want to handle your errors.
Got it. So error handling is all about like anticipating problems and having a plan for dealing with them gracefully.
Exactly. Now, we need to talk about the different ways we handle errors in synchronous versus asynchronous code.
Right, because asynchronous operations, like those file system calls we talked about, they work a bit differently, right?
Yeah, they do. And we have a few different approaches for dealing with errors in asynchronous code.
Like what kind of approaches?
Well, there are callbacks, promises, and async await. Each one has its own way of handling errors.
Callbacks, promises, async await. Those are some powerful tools for asynchronous programming.
They are. And we'll dive deeper into those in our next deep dive session.
Stay tuned, everyone. This JavaScript syntax journey is just getting started.
We'll be right back with more insights and tips. So callbacks are like, the old school way of handling asynchronous stuff.
Right, like sending a message and waiting for a reply.
Yeah, exactly. You give it a function that'll run when the operation's done, whether it worked or, if there was an error.
Okay, so it's like, hey, go do this thing, and when you're done, come back and tell me what happened.
Right. But callbacks can get kind of messy when you have a bunch of them happening. It can turn into what we call callback hell.
Callback hell sounds scary.
It can be. Your code ends up all indented and hard to follow. But luckily, we've got promises to help us out.
Promises like, I promise to do this thing eventually.
Yeah, kinda. Think of a promise as a placeholder for a value that's not available yet.
Got it.
So it's like, you order something online and you get a tracking number.
Right.
You don't have the package yet, but you know it's on its way. And the tracking number is like your promise.
I like that. So promises give us a way to deal with asynchronous stuff without getting lost in callback hell.
Exactly. They make your code much cleaner and easier to read.
Nice. And then there's async await, which I've heard is like the super modern way to handle asynchronous stuff.
Async await is awesome. It lets you write asynchronous code that looks almost like synchronous code.
Wait, really? So it's like it takes all that complicated asynchronous stuff and makes it look simple.
Pretty much. It's a real game changer for code readability.
Wow. So async await, it's like the magic wand of asynchronous programming.
You could say that, but it's important to remember that async await is actually built on top of promises, so understanding promises is still really important.
Got it. So promises are like the foundation, and async await is the fancy structure you build on top of it.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here, from the basics of variables and data types to the intricacies of asynchronous programming. It's been quite a journey.
It has. But even after this deep dive, I bet our junior dev listeners are still feeling a little overwhelmed. JavaScript syntax can be a lot to take in.
For sure. It's a lot for anyone, really. But remember, you don't have to memorize everything. The most important thing is to understand the core concepts and know where to look for the specifics when you need them.
Right, like the documentation is our friend.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to Google things, to ask questions in online forums, to reach out to the developer community. There's a ton of support out there.
Totally. And the best way to really learn is by doing rightest. Get your hands dirty, build some projects, make some mistakes, and learn from them.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And speaking of putting things into practice, let's bring it back to that surprising fact about function hoisting that we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah. That one's a real head scratcher.
It is, and it can have some real-world implications, especially when you're working on larger projects.
Right, like imagine you're working on a team and someone calls a function before it's defined.
Yeah. If you're not aware of hoisting, that can lead to some really confusing bugs.
Definitely. So understanding these little nuances of JavaScript syntax, it's not just about passing a test or something. It can actually help you write better, more reliable code.
Absolutely. So how about we give our junior devs some practical advice on how to start putting all this knowledge into practice?
Yeah, good idea. Where should they start?
Well, building small projects is always a great way to learn.
Right, like what kind of projects?
Well, a to-do list app is a classic. You can use arrays to store the list items, functions to add and remove items, and maybe even local storage to save the list so it persists.
Ooh, I like that. A to-do list app, simple, but it covers a lot of the basic concepts.
Exactly. And as you build more projects, you'll start to see how all these seemingly separate pieces of syntax fit together. You'll start to think like a JavaScript developer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's like you're not just learning the rules, you're learning how to use the tools to build cool stuff.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment, Try different things, see what works, see what doesn't work. That's how you really learn.
I love that. Embrace those mistakes. Okay, so we've talked about building projects, but what about the bigger picture? What are some of the awesome things you can do with JavaScript once you've got a good grasp of the syntax?
Oh man, the possibilities are endless. JavaScript is not just for websites anymore. With Node.js, you can build server-side applications, command line tools, desktop apps, you name it.
Wow. It's like JavaScript is everywhere.
It really is. And then there's the whole world of front-end frameworks and libraries like React, Vue, and Angular.
Ah, yes, the frameworks. They can be a bit intimidating for beginners, though.
They can be, but they're also super powerful. They give you structure and pre-built components that can help you build complex applications much faster.
So frameworks are like the power tools for front-end development.
Exactly. But just like with any power tool, it's important to learn how to use them properly. So focus on mastering the fundamentals of JavaScript first, and then explore the frameworks when you're ready.
Great advice. Don't rush into the frameworks before you've got a solid foundation. All right, so we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive. Let's recap some of those key takeaways for our junior dev listeners.
Yeah, good idea. What are the most important things for them to remember?
Well, first and foremost, writing clean and readable code is super important. Choose good variable names. Write concise functions. Use comments to explain your logic. It'll make your life so much easier in the long run.
Absolutely. And on that note, don't forget about error handling. It's like having insurance for your code. Things will go wrong, so be prepared to handle those errors gracefully.
Right. It's all about anticipating those problems and having a plan for dealing with them.
Exactly. And finally, never stop learning. JavaScript is a constantly evolving language, so there's always something new to discover. Embrace the challenge, stay curious, and keep building awesome things.
Love that. So what are some of the resources that our listeners can use to continue their JavaScript learning journey?
Well, there are tons of great online resources out there. Websites like FreeCodeCamp, MDN WebDocs, and W3 Schools are great places to start. And of course, there are countless books, tutorials, and online courses available.
And don't forget about the amazing JavaScript community. There are online forums, meetups, and conferences where you can connect with other developers, ask questions, and share your knowledge.
Absolutely. The JavaScript community is incredibly welcoming and supportive, so don't hesitate to reach out and get involved. So what's next for you on your JavaScript adventure?
Whatever it is, embrace the challenge, have fun, and keep coding. It's amazing to think about all the different things you can build with JavaScript, right? Websites, mobile apps, even stuff for the Internet of Things.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. JavaScript's definitely come a long way from its humble beginnings.
For sure. And it's constantly evolving, too. New frameworks, new tools. It seems like there's always something new to learn.
That's what keeps it exciting, right? It never gets boring.
Totally. Okay, so before we wrap up this JavaScript syntax deep dive, I want to circle back to that function hoisting thing one last time,
Yeah, it's worth repeating because it can really trip people up.
especially if you're working on a big project with lots of moving parts.
Right. You might think you've got everything in the right order, but then hoisting comes along and throws a wrench in the works.
So just to recap, function hoisting basically means that JavaScript lets you call a function before it appears in your code.
Exactly. Which can be confusing because, logically you'd expect the function to be defined before you use it.
Right, it's like trying to bake a cake before you've even mixed the ingredients.
Exactly. So even though JavaScript allows function hoisting, it's generally best practice to avoid it. Declare your functions before you call them. It makes your code much easier to read and understand.
Solid advice. Keep it simple, keep it clean. All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. Learning JavaScript, it's not just about memorizing syntax rules.
Right. It's so much more than that.
It's about developing a way of thinking, a problem-solving mindset.
It's about taking a big, complex problem and breaking it down into smaller, manageable pieces.
It's about understanding how all these different parts of the language work together to create something amazing.
And it's about never being afraid to experiment, to try new things, and to learn from your mistakes.
Absolutely. So to all our junior devs out there, keep exploring, keep building, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with JavaScript.
You got this. And hey, if you ever get stuck, don't hesitate to reach out to the amazing JavaScript community for help.
We're all in this together. All right, that's a wrap for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and happy coding, everyone.